What I really appreciate about the show is that everyone bops their heads during the intro music, even though our faces are not on screen.
Yeah, of course. It's been like this for
Listen.
months.
It's good music.
You
It's
have
catchy.
a banger. You know, you bob
You
your
gotta
head
use
to
the
it.
banger. All right.
That's how it works.
Well, it's Double Radio
Squeeze that
Gamescast,
royalty-free music.
episode number 133. As always, I'm your host, Ryan, and today I'm joined by my lovely cohort of co-hosts, Wyatt,
Hello.
Brett,
Hello.
and Alex.
Hi.
They're all extremely embarrassed to be here, which means it's time
was
to start
gonna
the show.
Wyatt in particular said I'm very ashamed for some reason, and nothing's happened yet, so I don't know why.
Our
He's
topic
got
for
something
today
planned.
that I have posed to our trio of lads is games that have stuck with you. The things that make you remember them. And more specifically, not just games, but individual elements. And we'll get into what I mean by that very shortly. But first, we have breaking news in the games industry. And by breaking news, I mean
good.
Dwarf Fortress has a release date.
Oh my... What?
A Steam release date.
An actual... Wow.
The reason I bring this up is because everyone, I think, knows what Dwarf Fortress is, at least a little bit. They've heard rumors of Dwarf Fortress as a
I
thing.
have no idea what you're talking about.
You've never
I've
heard
dipped
of
my
this,
toe-
Wyatt.
It
I've
sounds
dipped my
vaguely
toes-
familiar.
We've talked about it before on the podcast.
Yeah, this is the
I've
game that
dipped
has
my
like the
toes into
most
it.
fun patch notes to ever read.
Oh yeah.
Like
That and The Sims.
fixed
But
dwarves
it's-
losing their eyeglasses in a mine shaft or something like that would be a patch note for this game. It's great, truly insane. But the game used ASCII art. It was all little ASCII art, and many people that have eyes don't necessarily like that.
So people made texture packs, but you got to get the authentic experience first.
People made texture packs, but it doesn't help the UI being hard to read. It's a text-based engine, so it refreshes as if it's a text-based engine, not meant to show graphics. So they've been working on a Steam version of this game for a long time. By they, I mean the single lone developer has been working on this for a long time. I think with a couple of art people helping out. I could be wrong about that, but I believe he's had some artist help.
So that the trees no longer have to be the letter N.
Yeah. So it is not reimagining. It's the same game. It just has graphics now. It looks like a video game.
Wow.
And actually, I would say it looks pretty good, all things considered. It's still very much an information-heavy game that doesn't really have animations. Things move like a tile to the left or right, classic roguelite style. But it looks good, and this is a thing that I'm looking forward to playing now that it has a functioning UI that I can read with my eyes and not
Oh my
cry.
god, graphics!
Ryan, I really feel like you're not being honest enough about
these
about how you
look.
feel.
It's coming out.
These look!
These do look. The Dwarf Fortress, the reason I mention it is because we've talked about this game in the past, and I play a lot of games akin to Dwarf Fortress, things like RimWorld and whatnot, that are very good. But Dwarf Fortress is like the one. Whenever you hear people talk about those games, you hear them talk about Dwarf Fortress, which is the one.
I feel like also Caves of Qud is involved in that talk a little bit,
Yes,
but
Caves of
it's
Qud
the more
is definitely-
fringe Dwarf Fortress.
But it also is kind of developed with a little bit more artistic stylings, because it's not just, I think, ASCII art. It is still in that vein, but it has,
it has
a
some
little
more
bit
stuff to it.
iconography with it. All right. The other big thing from this week is that Square Enix is trying some NFT garbage.
Again.
Yeah.
Again, it's called Symbiogenesis, which, for those who haven't heard, the NFT like video games market has crashed already. It's gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
It went down 90-something%.
It like if
Only
it wasn't
90?
That big
if
to
it
begin
was-
with.
okay, if this whole thing was a race, right? All these NFT projects were lined up at the start line. The starting pistol goes off and everyone trips over and just face plants. Like
Because I'm still in the
immediately.
vein of like, I don't think NFTs have ever taken off. Like, normally when you see this kind of tech or something that people are hyping, like VR is a good example, I think. VR will have taken off already. Like, it'll take off as a cool prototype tech thing, and then games companies will start to make things, and then it'll stick around for a while, and maybe get better, like VR is doing. NFTs are not VR.
And I feel like the important thing is like with those like very early tech, you see a lot of like excitement around it, and that's when you pounce on it, right? No one was excited for
the people
NFT
excited about
anything.
NFTs are the people that think they can make a lot of money from them, but the majority of consumers do not care about
It's-
having a numbered serial number on your.
It's the
so
same
funny.
people who fall for pyramid schemes.
It's so funny because so many of the people that are like, oh, all this tech is very very like uncontrolled, it's very decentralized, and then they get screwed over because it's a very decentralized, like unregulated system. It's so
Just
so
remember,
funny to watch.
technically this is a joke because of things, but do the right thing. Screenshot an NFT.
Yeah, and what makes this even more funny is the elevator pitch for what this game is about.
Yeah.
It's a game.
is-
It's not just NFTs.
I mean, calling this a game is maybe being generous.
Is it pachinko?
Because we don't know anything
they
about
pulling
the
a Konami?
gameplay at all. The only thing we know is that the
NFTs are the
NFT
pitch
games,
for this.
yeah, NFTs are the pitch for this, and the story is anti-NFTs, which is really weird for an NFT game. It's like
So
they're
it's
pulling
trying to
the
get both target audiences
So
and
this is the
No, it's just
the description of
stupid. It's
what
just
this
dumb.
game is. So Symbiogenesis, this is from the Square Enix press release, is a brand new
Yes.
entertainment content. So they don't use the word game; they use
not
entertainment
even
content in a
mean?
self-contained
That-
world where a
that's
wide
disgusting.
cast of characters symbiosis,
What does
all
that
of
mean?
which
This-
can be
this-
collected as digital art.
Hey, Square, hi. What does that mean?
This
An
means
interactive
that you
story
can.
and a dedicated
can-
community. The art can be used for social media profile pictures and as character in a story that takes place in an alternate world where the player can untangle a mystery by completing missions that revolve around questions of monopolization and distribution of resources. AKA the things that
Yeah.
NFTs are constantly under fire for.
You know what's beautiful about that description? It is simultaneously incredibly specific and incredibly vague at the same time. It's
Yep.
incredible. It's honestly it's an achievement.
I can
And,
imagine this
you know-
as 10 different things and all of them are bad. None of
It's-
them
this
make me
is-
excited.
10 different endings and they're all the bad ending.
This is the kind of thing that you see at like the Game Awards or something that like Jeff will say, and you'll just be like,
It'll be an
What?
offhand.
And
You
then
can
the-
tell they sponsored like one award. They're gonna throw out
"It's
the like.
yeah."
They'll do it right rapid fire after esports team of the year or something. And
Nah,
Yeah.
I feel like this is bottom of the barrel RPG Maker garbage.
Don't insult RPG Maker like that, Alex Labella. How
Hey,
dare
hey,
you?
hey!
You
Great
know-
things can come out of RPG Maker. I'm saying it has high highs. It also has the lowest of lows.
You know, when I first read like the very first headline that I read, it was probably like Yang Ya's video on the topic, right? I was like, I think I understand why Square Enix is called Square Enix now, right? Before they were called Squaresoft, right? It's because they have become masters at trying to take the square peg and trying to put it into the circle hole. They are absolute masters at it, and it's so funny to watch them
And-
do it every single time.
the thing with
That's
I
right.
think
The square hole.
NFTs in general is just I don't see how this would make you more money than just having microtransactions.
Yeah.
Because NFTs
And-
actually have like an operating cost. There is a cost associated with maintaining these things, which
Yeah.
it's small, but it's still a cost that like you just have your artist make some cool art assets and offer them as skins or something, or do this profile picture thing, but without making them exclusive and have them cheaper, but more people can get them.
Because
I
what
don't know,
you're
like companies have been doing forever.
what they're offering is basically like I can put the original Final Fantasy VII into my PS2 and screen grab a picture of Cloud Strife and put that as my profile picture on Discord
Brett, I
right
can do
now.
one better. I can
for
type
free.
into Google Cloud Strife
Yeah.
and then
I'm
screen
saying,
grab
like,
the first image of
Like me taking it from the game. And even from this game where you have to theoretically pay for these assets, I can just type in snip in my search bar and use the snipper tool to
Oh my god,
take
we
it.
have the technology for that.
I
That's
don't
crazy.
there's no
That's
like
crazy.
the amount of
But,
people that
Brett,
will even
the pixels,
engage
you
in
don't
a s-
own them, so you really don't feel a sense of pride and accomplishment that you would
I don't
feel if you
care.
did.
Nobody does. Not
You
even the
don't own-
person that made them.
Here's the thing about you don't even own the pixels. You own a URL that says that you technically own them.
Yes.
I don't get
It's-
it.
It's like the participation trophy of like owning something, right?
It's just so
Yeah.
confusing in terms of like
Ah.
they seem like they have detriments to everybody. Like I feel like even the companies making games based on this are just shoveling in detritus into their project that they won't need, that has an operating cost which is already a huge problem for especially indie developers, of like all these companies trying to make multiplayer games that don't have the infrastructure to make a multiplayer game, then run into the issue of, well, now we need to pay the operating cost of a multiplayer game. And we didn't think about that, but now it's that on a bigger scale.
And don't forget, NFTs are also harmful to the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think to add. Oh, sorry. Go for it, Brett.
I can't imagine being like the classic story of like, oh, this guy in Japan went through college to be a completely different like career or whatever, and one friend saw that he was like really good at programming, so he got him a job at like Konami or something, and then it just joined like the original Team Silent and became a huge part of the Silent Hill franchise or something. But that happens like today, and you have all these big ideas in your brain, and you get put on the NFT project, and your career stops there.
I can only imagine the internal conversations at large game studios where it's like, oh yeah, that's the NFT team. Don't you just feel sorry for those poor suckers?
The thing is, like, it's not often the even stranger thing about NFTs game projects, to be specifically, is that so many of them are startups that are like latching onto this technology. Like Square Enix is, I think, the first major publisher who has a NFT based game. Ubisoft had a few attempts at some NFT adjacent things for
with
some of their
ports and
existing
whatever that
games.
was.
Yeah, they had like the whole Splinter Cell thing for a little while that just didn't make a lot of sense. But that wasn't like actively just making the game worse, as symbiogenesis just seems to have not been thought out well. I just don't understand the thought process behind this. Maybe at some point this tech will take off for some use that we don't know about.
And to add salt onto this NFT wound, apparently people were under the assumption that this was a new Parasite Eve project.
Yes.
And there was a bunch of rumors leading up to it. Now, I don't know much about Parasite Eve, to be honest with you, but I can imagine it's a franchise that probably hasn't been touched in a good while, right? From what I understand. And so
the
and so the
PS2
fan
or PS1.
Oh god.
PS1 started.
That's even worse than I thought.
It ended on the PSP, I think. With the Tetsuya Nomura game. That was definitely a Tetsuya Nomura game, and it was not very good.
Imagine you're like a longtime Parasite Eve fan. And you're like, oh yeah, they're gonna bring back Parasite Eve. You know, like they've been doing all these remakes recently for all these like older
completely
PS1,
unrelated
PS2
NFT
games.
projects.
No, Wyatt, don't worry. There will be a Parasite Eve NFT in the game. In the experience.
Experience.
The world building experience. All right, well, let's get off the NFT train and talk about more fun things, such as
something better.
Square Enix Montreal, otherwise known as Studio Onoma, which got rebranded a couple weeks ago and had prior been bought by Embracer Group, along with Eidos and the other IPs that Square Enix was getting rid of in their North American dev teams. Has been shut down. So Studio Onoma got created, and then 3 weeks later, no longer exists.
Studio Oh No.
This was the team responsible for the Go mobile Square Enix ports, which are actually very good. Not ports; they're different, like puzzle versions of their popular franchises.
I remember I own Hitman Go, which is technically speaking the first Hitman game I've ever played, and it was actually really cool.
It's very fun.
And
that's right. There's
really
also
well made.
There's also Tomb Raider Go, and I think a John Wick Go too.
I think that was a different team.
This is John Wick Hex, which is a
Hex.
PC game, by a different studio. But yeah, they're shut down now. It seems like Embracer Group might be cutting some of the chuff, and a lot of the team members have been moved to Eidos. From the way that this article is worded, which is good, because we always hate to see people lose their jobs. I think this is just restructuring. This doesn't, to me, spell doom for Eidos or anything.
No,
especially considering Eidos has been teasing that there might be a Deus Ex project in the works, as well as assisting on some Microsoft projects. I believe Fable is the thing they're assisting with right now.
Really?
That sounds right.
Which to me says Embracer Group is like, hey, we're gonna give you some leeway to make your own thing, but we also want you to like assist in a thing that'll make us money now, which is being contracted out by another dev studio to help, which is totally normal.
And I think from what I understand too, they part of the reason for shutting the studio down is that they didn't really want to focus on mobile games, and they wanted to have more of a focus on like console and PC.
It makes sense.
Which totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because when like previously you have like the Hitman, Tomb Raider franchises to like latch onto to be like, oh well, you like these already. Now you can play a version of them in like the train on the way to work or whatever. But like now you don't have the Square Enix properties to justify you making like a very involved mobile game. And if you're not Fortnite, there's really no reason to make a very involved mobile game nowadays.
Also,
you just don't get the notoriety that you need.
Yeah, and also I feel like maybe it's just because I'm not as plugged into like mobile games as I used to be, but like I don't even think making like mobile offshoots of like a big franchise is really that much of a thing anymore. It used to be.
We're approaching the point where you could just
kinda...
put the thing on the phone because phones are getting so powerful now.
I mean, there's full versions of like PUBG, Warzone,
tons of indie games are now just fully available on phones because there's been ports of like Stardew Valley and other just full games that are great. So
and because I think devs are expecting people more and more now to have some kind of controller that they use for their mobile games, so they're just porting whole games over and not really caring how the controls work because you just have a regular controller now.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm not a mobile gamer at all, but my favorite approach so far has been Microsoft has cloud gaming for their Xbox Game Pass subscription. You get the cloud stuff if you pay for the cloud stuff, which I've been using to play Skate 3 on my computer, which has been wonderful and surprisingly doable. Although I did try to play Forza 5 on cloud. I would never do that because I have a computer that can run it, but I was like, oh, I'm curious how this works. Don't try it. That game does not, the bitrate of cloud streaming cannot handle dust particles everywhere, and the screen just becomes nothing. You cannot see what's happening. It controls fine, you just can't tell what's going on. Maybe if I had Google Fiber, that would be better. But I think we're approaching a point where at least like stuff that is less visually complicated works well as a streaming thing on a phone. And there are some games that have touch controls now. You can play a lot of the old Rare games with touch controls on your phone, which is cool.
Oh.
So just a neat little thing. That's the big stuff from this past week. We'll definitely have missed something, but due to travel and whatnot, that's inevitable. So there's nothing. I don't think anything else is headline worthy aside from the fact that God of War Ragnarok is scoring very well, as everyone knew it would.
Wow. Can you believe it?
Very little
as of
surprise
the Tuesday when this comes out on YouTube, just a day away, guys. Ragnarok.
Ooh.
Can you believe it? Wow. Just a day away.
I was
wish
very
almost
tempted.
here.
Boy.
I was very tempted to call into work and be like, "Hey, listen, I'm telling you right now, I'm not sick, but I'm going to be sick starting the 9th to like the 5th to like however long.
You have
I'm
a
gonna
full
be
day
sick."
therapy appointment with Dr. Kratos. Your excuse.
Family therapy session with Dr. Kratos.
All right. Well, with that, let's jump into our topic for tonight, which is the games that you remember, the mechanics, the art, the sound that you remember all the way and have kept with you since you've played a thing. To give an example of this, I'm going to jump in with, I think, a thing that most of us will commonly think of when we think iconic art styles, which is Legend of Zelda Wind Waker.
Oh.
Because this is a game, I love this game for many reasons, but most of it being nostalgia. However, the art style, I think, is the thing that kind of cemented it as this is going to stick with me for a long time type of game. And I don't even know if that's Wind Waker's like victory or if it's the failure of the rest of the games industry.
Now, do you think this is because it's a good example of a timeless art style that ages well, or that it's just so unique to itself?
Yes and yes. It's a yes on both fronts. They tried something different, which at the time was not super well received.
Oh god, no!
And-
People were furious.
Yeah. And to note here, like we know this after the fact because none of us were old enough to be following games news when Wind Waker came out. But when you look at this game now and you go back and read stuff from the time, man, people thought this game looked stupid. It was like the '90s era. Anything cartoony is trash. You gotta remember, this was before anime was mainstream. You didn't have them cartoons on your TV screen was not a normal thing. But now it's been a lot more accepted, and people have kind of come around on the idea of, hey, this actually has aged incredibly well. It's like, I have not played the HD version of Wind Waker. It's not on the Switch, so I can't play it. But I still have my GameCube, and I still have my copy of Wind Waker that I can stick in my GameCube and play. And man, occasionally I just go put it in and play some Wind Waker, because man, it's great time.
I mean, how can you even play the HD version now? You have the Wii and you have the Nintendo Switch. I don't think there was anything in between those two, right?
Yeah,
no console comes to mind.
Well, Wyatt, I can't think of you are forgetting something. Something called the Wii. Oh. You know, that you and I, otherwise we and you, could do together. That name for a console was really just a bad decision.
Breath of the Wild came out on that. Isn't that crazy?
What?
Yeah, that's crazy.
No
Isn't
way.
It crazy that the Sheikah Slate was the Wii U gamepad?
What? I thought there was a Switch exclusive.
No.
No, the Sheikah Slate does not look like a Nintendo Switch. It is meant to look like a Wii U gamepad because it was designed for the Wii U.
Well, that makes sense. Because it really is a relic of the past.
What a rough time. And yeah, back to Wind Waker for a second. I want to give special focus to, I think, all of the visual effects of that game for being incredibly simple and yet still more impressive than even a lot of modern games. Just with how everything looks, because sometimes that overlaying black squiggly circles with little rims of yellow light does a perfect job of showing an explosion in a way that is scarier than any modern thing.
Mm-hmm.
Man, when your child brain looks at that and goes, well, what could be behind that black screen? I don't know. Maybe some exploding goblins. And then whatever you imagine is worse than what the game will ever show to you. So, get a little bit of that horror movie magic in your Wind Waker.
And then you stab Ganon in the forehead.
And for full transparency too, I've never played Wind Waker. I've talked many times before about how there's so many Zelda games that I just have no way of playing that I've always wanted to play, which is why they need to come out with some sort of collection for the Switch. Nintendo! Sorry, anyway.
They had a collection for the 25th anniversary when Skyward Sword came out.
Nope, it was just Skyward Sword. There was no like...
Yeah, they had a Mario collection.
Really?
But... But there was something from Wind Waker that always stuck with me, and I remember I had heard it once, and then I spent an entire afternoon as a small child trying to find... It was a specific song from Wind Waker, and I didn't know the name of it. And I was like typing away. I was trying to find like the name of that song, and I think it doesn't have an official title. It's just like Dragon Roost Island theme or something. And I was like, this is like one of the prettiest pieces of music I've ever heard in my life.
Zelda music has always been phenomenal.
Yeah, just something about that track specifically. I'm like, it's so like warm and inviting and like welcoming, and I'm like, I really want to play this game, but I have no way to play it. Thanks, Nintendo.
Come on, Nintendo. It's free money. It is free money. I will gladly pay full price at this point for just any Wind Waker.
I feel like at this point, Nintendo would be shocked at how many people are like me and want to play more Zelda games, but physically cannot because of hardware restrictions.
Because they don't port their stuff as much as they should.
No, yeah.
And when they do, they only do it for a limited amount of time.
Especially things that don't even necessarily have.
Reason.
Like, I get it in the case of Super Mario Galaxy 2 occasionally. I think they could fix it, but it does require actual effort to make it so the game is playable without a Wii pointer. But you could do it. I think in the case of every Zelda game, they've always kind of been either cross-platform or at a weird time and don't really have mechanics that need you to have a certain thing. There might be one game that requires you to use like the GameCube microphone or something, that I recall hearing about, but I don't think it's a mainline game.
Well, do you think stuff from the Zelda games from the DS, where you can easily replace the stylus mechanic, with something?
Who wants to play
those are
those
harder
again?
for sure. I mean, Spirit Train is really good.
I was gonna Spirit Train and Phantom Hourglass were my first Zelda games.
I remember
Yeah.
actually playing Phantom Hourglass when I had a
Those
DS
games are
many,
very
many
good 2D
years ago.
Zeldas.
I
But I don't know how you would port those. You'd have to rework a lot of the game. It
Yeah.
would be possible, but it would not be the same. I think honestly, you could put them to PC. Okay,
Yeah.
because you'd have a
Ah.
mouse that you could use, but then like,
Yeah.
I think people are gonna balk at playing a Zelda game on a computer without a controller.
And you'd
as
have
an idea.
to. You have to
We're gonna be like,
redo
what
all
is this, a
the.
MOBA? Why am I clicking
Yeah.
around?
Have to redo all the like
To
UI
throw your
and
boomerang,
everything.
silly.
It'd be possible, but that'd be a lot of work. I think it's more the case of like, why don't we have a modern, accessible way to play Ocarina of Time? It might be on the N64 Nintendo Switch Online at this point, but then why can't we play the like modern port that they did to the 3DS?
Yeah.
I was about to say 3DS, but then you said modern, and I was like, oh yeah.
Well, I'm
it's
like, they have the
kinda-
3DS port, but I don't want to play that game on a tiny screen. Play on a
That's
big screen.
I have no problem saying that the DS and 3DS existing is like a scourge on modern games industry
Really?
because like if you want to play any of those games now,
Yeah.
like if you're like SMT4 is locked to the 3DS or whatever, and that game is supposedly really, really good. People keep making joke box arts of it coming out on the Xbox One, and it looks completely wrong. You can't imagine playing that game on anything because of the two screen layout, and like you have to redo the whole game from the
They
bottom up, even artistically, which is not what you have to do all the time for like a remake or a remaster.
But
And
hey,
so if
the
you're a
DS
dev,
gave us Spectrobes, so I'm okay with it.
it did give us Spectrobes. It also gave us Professor Layton, which is one thing that I have to be very thankful for. And Professor Layton has been ported over to the Switch. I'm not sure how well, because I still have it on the 3DS, but apparently you can play the most recent game featuring his daughter on the Switch. But it's also been ported over to mobile, and I think it does a better job with the mobile port than it would on the Switch.
Touchscreen feels pretty necessary.
that makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Well, refocusing on the idea of things that have stuck with you. What do some other people got? What's your stuff that has kept with you past playing a game, for good or bad? This can also be.
I was
a
gonna say
game
one
that
of
you
my
remember very
examples is just
poorly.
something that's outlandishly bad.
And not necessarily a game. It could be a mechanic. I think that another freebie here for all of us is the Nemesis system of
Oh,
being a
Yeah,
super
that's
memorable mechanic.
yep.
I don't think we
that's-
need
that's
to
one
talk
of the-
about it because we've talked about it before,
that's-
but just making sure we say our due diligence and mention.
Yeah,
Make sure it
that's one
has
of
a
my
place
main.
in this conversation.
Yeah.
So
That's one of my main things that has a game with me is the like completely unique mechanic or almost completely unique mechanic. In the case that I guess the Nemesis system is sort of in other games, but it's still
Never been done as well as
Yeah.
its
Mhm.
origin.
But there's that. There was what else was there? Oh, the sort of fourth wall breaking integration that um oh my god, what was the what was the Zelda Link's Awakening esque game that we played for Game Pass
Tunic?
a while ago?
Tunic?
Tunic, yeah.
Yeah.
With its manual
Oh, yeah.
gathering.
That
Oh,
manual is a great example of, I think, a modern thing to throw into this list.
such good stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a thing that I'm going to remember for a long time, even if I never actually finish Tunic, which I should do, but so many games to play.
So this isn't a mechanic, but it's always stuck out to me. Listen, I wish there were so many times in my life where I wish I could play The Last of Us for the first time again, because man, what
Story.
it's and that story, right?
The
Like I
thing I'll
just
always remember is the giraffe. Like, all the
Yeah.
time. The singular giraffe is the thing I think of when I think of Last of Us.
and I feel like that's a very common, like, and that's a wonderful, wonderful scene in its own right, but it's not the one that always stuck out to me. For me, it's the farmhouse scene. After you meet
Yeah.
up with Tommy at the dam, right? Like Ellie runs off. She just like context, or maybe not spoilers. Maybe shouldn't say
Yeah,
anything.
don't
I guess
go
it's got.
too detail-y into it.
All right. Well, I'm gonna give you a quick setup. You're in a barn because reasons, and it's this whole scene about Ellie, kind of revealing what Joel means to her in a very reserved way and without it being too like sappy, you know? And it's like this is why you're important to me without laying it on too thick, right? And it's just Joel's staunch like I cannot be emotionally invested in this situation in any way and I refuse to open myself up again. And just that whole
Yeah.
scene. There's no gameplay. It's a cutscene and that's it. But it's just incredible writing, amazing performances, and just like it. I often cite that scene as the moment where I was like, okay, not only do I want to make video games for a living, but I want to write for video games for a living. That's what inspired me to, kind of be where I am now, even. It just and that's that like of all the incredible gameplay sequences, all the incredible like cutscenes and story sequences in that game, that one always sticks out to me because it's a perfect example of like so much is being said, but not physically like from their mouths, right? You can infer so
Yeah.
much as to what they're saying. And it
I mean,
just
Naughty Dog is also just in Last of Us, I think, stands out in terms of writing, but their other franchises stand out in terms of set pieces. Like, they have some of the
Yeah.
best set pieces in video games. I think only things that come close now
absolutely.
are modern Call of Duties. I think get pretty close, not in terms of like
Yeah.
narrative payoff because they're not that type of game.
This is Call of Duty.
It's not what they're going
They're
for.
their set pieces and just their
Yep.
I don't want to
Yeah.
say it's their cinematic approach to
Yeah.
video games.
I also think the reason they stick out a lot in Western games is I actually think they have a lot. The way Naughty Dog, specifically Uncharted 2, is what I think of when I think of the train sequence and how memorable
One of my
that
favorite
is. I think
sequences
anyone
in all
who's ever
gaming.
played that opening remembers it forever
Yes.
because it's just so well done. The thing that it most reminds me of is Japanese video games. Makes me think of like JRPG cutscenes and set pieces, or things like Devil May Cry scenes or whatnot, where it just goes over the top, but in a way that is just grounded enough for you to buy it.
Yeah. Well, that's something that
Riding that
Uncharted.
line.
That's something that to me, like Uncharted, is a master of like, is what's happening on screen utterly absurd? Yes. Do I
Do I
still
care?
some? Yes.
Absolutely
And-
not.
I
I
am in
care what's
fact running
happening, but I don't
I
faster
care
care
than
what's
about
happening. I
how-
don't care that it's breaking
Yeah.
my disbelief at that point. I'm like, all right,
I am
I'm
in
in
fact
for the ride.
I'm in fact running faster than a bridge is collapsing and fist fighting a terrorist on top of a train with a bomb on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's rad. I think that's the type of thing that always stands out well. But I often think when you have those scenes, the problem is they kind of blend together. That's why I call it the train scene, is because I think the train scene is the perfect starting point so that you always remember it, because you're playing it right at the start of the game. That's going to be your hook to the game, and you're not being, it's not like a middle of the road thing you're getting wound up in back to other stuff. It's kind of the explosive intro, then it calms down for a little while, which I think makes it stick out a lot more.
And what's great too is that it's in medias res, right? So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna come back to this point eventually, and they tease you a couple times as to when you think it's gonna happen, because they mention a train a couple times leading up to it. And you're like, oh, this is
Yeah.
it. This is what's gonna lead up to it. Nope, it's just they're on a train going somewhere.
There's no train.
Chekhov's train, and then
Whatever.
the camera just rotates.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a real strength of cinematic design, is when you can achieve that and make it memorable. You did a great job. There's a scene in Xenoblade 1 that is, I think I hold with the same regard very early in Xenoblade 1 that I will not say because it is a major spoiler for the opening of the game, and man, anyone should go play that and not have it spoiled. But anyone that has played it knows exactly what I'm talking about as soon as I mention it. But yeah, I think that type of scene is just strength in terms of storytelling when you can get it right. But getting it right is very rare. And far more games try than ever actually do nail that type of scene that to really hook you. get you in. At least making them memorable. All right, who else has got something they want to talk about?
I don't even have a specific game for this because it's just applicable to literally everyone. Could probably immediately think of like 10 different things. We've talked about it a little bit before, but just like so many games have that at least one song where it's just like you might not even be listening to music. You might not even have played the game yet, but you just heard the song before in like a friend's playlist or something, and then it'll just earworm into your brain and be like, I should play that. And that's like that is when the game itself is not even in the picture at all, and you're thinking about it anyway. That's exactly what this topic is pretty much.
Otherwise,
Even
it was
with
the
Ace
entire
Combat, if I didn't have
soundtrack of
motion
Final
sickness.
Fantasy VII, Ace Combat, and Project Wingman.
Pretty much. But yeah, like I think of that one the part in Halo 3 when you're going to the Ark and the like the camera's mounted on the side of the Pelican as it's like launching out of the forward into dawn, and it's going through all the battle that's going on or whatever, all the way down to the actual surface of the Ark, and that song that plays there is just your quintessential Marty O'Donnell bop that is just so simple, and it just kind of repeats the same thing over and over, but it's so good, and it complements that scene so well, like the entire rest of the franchise up until a certain point. But that particularly when I was a kid, and I played the campaign for the first time at a friend's house because I didn't have an Xbox yet. I was like, that is the coolest scene ever, and I didn't even know like enough about the internet to try to scramble around for like what the song was to listen to it in my own time or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's
Well,
just
even
every game has at least one, one.
and the shitmaster is where they're like, "Oh, we're outnumbered 3-1." He's like, "Then it's a fight." You're like,
It is
"Yeah, let's go,
Let's go.
Oh, those lines! I think a lot of video games have like
Burn
the
their
line
mongoloids.
the line version of the your music example as well.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Like Fire Emblem. I have yet to find the actual the exact Fire Emblem game where this line appears in. Either that or I found it and I keep forgetting. But the one where the character says "pick a god and pray."
Yeah.
Oh,
Whoa.
I
That's
think
awesome.
that
And it's
is
one of the
Awake-
really
it's either
early
Awakening-
pixelated ones.
I think that Awakening has a character that says that as a reference to the original. There is
That's
definitely.
awesome.
I am almost positive that is a line in the Fire Emblem Warriors game when you're playing a certain character. It'll say, "Pick a god and pray" whenever you do your special attack, which is incredible.
That's
I want to say it's Ferdinand, but I could be wrong. I want to say that's correct. The big dude on a horse says, "Pick a god of prey," and then slashes everyone around him.
I kind of have one
Yeah.
that has to do with music, so it's kind of a nice little
transition.
This might surprise some of you. One of the moments that I've written down here is a boss fight, and that might be surprising for anyone who's watched the show before and knows my very very spicy hot take on boss fights. In that most of the boss fights that I've ever played, I kind of hate them. And that's a whole other discussion.
This is why
And
we
I
have
know
4 people
that
on the
I'm
show,
dumb.
is we need dissenting
Yes.
opinions.
Balance out.
Otherwise, Brett and I would just take over and talk about Dark Souls.
We
No,
would.
I understand. I understand.
Dodge
And,
rolling is good. Dodge
and
rolling is right.
And not all boss fights are created equal or created the same. I understand. There are exceptions for me personally. One of them is my favorite boss fight in any game I've ever played, which is the Hyperion boss fight in Returnal. It's the 4th boss fight. It's the one with the giant organ.
Super cool.
Bread. This boss fight rules.
It's pretty sick.
Yeah. So it's in this giant tower, right? And there's this song that's playing throughout almost this entire level. Well, really throughout the whole game, but that's a whole other thing. And you're like slowly ascending this tower, going upwards after you fought through this whole level to get there. And the music is getting louder and louder, and then you finally come across this like gross looking plant creature, and he is just shredding on an organ, and it's this incredible rendition of "Don't Fear the Reaper" by
You were
Blue Oyster
convinced did
Cult.
not exist until I told you about it.
Yes. Although I had not reached this part when you said that to me, so I'm glad
Okay.
that you had like told me that, so that this scene had much more of an
Planted the
impact
seeds.
for me. Yes. And then going back, I was like, holy shit, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Anyway,
It's crazy.
yeah, and the way it ties in with the story is really cool. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is this boss. So Returnal, third person, bullet hell roguelike hybrid. The patterns of the shots from the enemy, the fucking amazing rendition of that song, and just everything about it. It just all comes together, and it is so much fun. And I think, like, man, I think I probably had to play that boss until I beat him for the first time. It was probably like 5, 6 times. And when I
That's pretty
finally
hard.
beat him, it was one of the only times where in a game where I'm constantly dying, where I'm just like, yes, I did it. because it was legitimately just such a fun boss fight for me. And
Also tuned
I
very
haven't.
well. I feel like
Yes.
out of because I have some issues with the earlier Returnal bosses that I think are maybe a little bit too much. Specifically the first one. The second one I think is pretty handleable, but the first one is
The first one's annoying.
a gigantic like difficulty wall coming from someone who's played a lot of roguelikes and every Souls game. I'm like, man, this is a rough first boss. It's doable, but that's a wall for a lot of people. That's like you're gonna have to slam into that wall and get past it, or else you will not be able to play the rest of the game. But Hyperion particularly, I think, feels really well balanced in that it's constantly fun without being so overly challenging that you can't get through it. It reminds me a lot of Metal Hellsinger bosses in that regard.
Yeah, it just
Very
and
similar
and
to
I
mine.
feel like it wouldn't have the same effect on me if that organ rendition of "Don't Fear the Reaper" wasn't playing in the background, because
Such
it's
a
so
bop.
it's well, first of all, I love organ music. Like I love the sound of like a classic organ, right? But the song is so deafening, and at first it's like, wow, the sound mixing is kind of, but then you realize, no, that's the point. Is that it's this song throughout specifically this level, but through the whole game, that's tormenting this main character. And like, I say main character because I forgot her name briefly.
Everyone
it's,
did. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, hey, that's the other end of the coin. For this.
Even though she says her name like 50,000 times throughout the entire game.
Sometimes repetition is not a good thing.
No.
Right. But like, it's tormenting this character. So when you finally get to the source of the music, it's like deafening, and it just adds so much to the fight. And just like the design of this creature is great. Like the whole area it's in is really is just so gorgeously crafted. It just I literally have
Very
nothing
good.
bad to say. I have nothing bad to say about that boss fight. Like, to me, perfect in like almost every way. Like I no complaints whatsoever.
Yeah, I think boss and especially final boss music is like a really big fat green check mark on this sort of thing, because like
Yeah.
that's often like the most memeable song from the game that it's in, and part of that is definitely because like JRPGs especially like save the best for last for the final boss, and like most Final Fantasy games will just have like a, this is a really good fantasy soundtrack. We got some maybe some cool shreddy synth cheesy guitars in here, whatever, and then the final boss hits, and it's just like a 16-minute long like prog rock masterpiece that just comes out of nowhere because Nobuo Uematsu is insane.
He
But
is
that's
insane.
he is. But it's like, maybe
Also
you'll
Soken.
survive.
Soken
Also
does the
Soken,
same
yeah.
thing in 14. So
Yeah, which we'll hear more of, I guess, for 16.
oh yeah,
I have a
looking
final
forward to it.
boss for a single player one, yeah. But that's like that's the JRPG staple, and especially I try to say this with as spoiling as little as possible, but there's no story spoilers for Persona 3 here. But there is a song that repeats through your whole game because you're spending hours and hours in the Velvet Room fusing your dang old demons together. And it's a really good song that makes those hours and hours go by in what feels like 15 minutes. And it is almost embarrassing to be sitting there making some perfectly stats, like really cool looking guy or whatever from like Greek mythology or something after like 2 hours of fusing the same thing over and over, and your like mom will come back down and be like, "You've been here for too long." But I really like the music though. And then the final boss of that game, without saying anything about it, a pretty cool Persona song will start playing, and then all of a sudden a sped up rock remix version of the Red
Oh
Velvet theme
no.
starts playing, and I just had to stop. I just had to be like, oh, because I was only like half expecting it. But whenever games do that, where they like beat a song into your head, like little, much like how Returnal does with the Don't Fear the Reaper thing, where you hear the motif, or like Snake Eater, you just hear the full song multiple times in the
Oh
game,
yeah.
and then
Especially when climbing a ladder.
yes, exactly. The final boss just sneaks it in until that's the song playing for the final boss encounter. It just feels like, ooh, there's probably
Motifs.
some, yeah, those
Almost like they're
musicians got
trying to
things.
drive home a theme.
I know, it's
Almost,
crazy how that
Alex.
works.
Yeah, there's another side to this too that I also really like, which is kind of the inverse. In JRPGs, I think do this a lot because they tend to have more of a focus on music that you can listen to on its own. I think a lot of Western game soundtracks tend to be in the space of, this is a soundtrack, it's going to be like a movie soundtrack and play second fiddle to what you're seeing and playing, which is fine. Like, there's no problem with that. It's just
it's audio wallpaper to what you're supposed to.
Yeah, it's meant to enhance the thing that you're doing rather than be its own cool thing at the same time. Which is a totally valid way to compose for video games. But the reason I think it stands out so much in a lot of Japanese games is because there's this moment when you're listening to a JRPG song and you'll just go, I could just listen to this. Like, I could just go jam out to that. In fact, I bought a record player solely so I could play Final Fantasy XIV music finals that I got. I don't own any other records, just those.
That's the most, Ryan, that is the most gamer thing I think I've ever heard in my entire life.
And it gets good amount of use. But there's a specific thing that a couple of RPGs have done, which I won't name, because if I do, it spoils them, just by what I'm talking about, which is introducing a character that is a very lovable character who everyone likes at their introduction, and then very shortly into their introduction playing the music, but by the music I mean the, oh no, something really bad's gonna this person's either gonna be shanked by someone or turn
musical
evil.
Foreshadowing.
And you're like, they just use the music to implant the sense of existential dread of, I know this is not going to turn out well, and I hate that because this character's great. Happens in tons of stuff. Man, it's a good trope. It's like the one time I think you can get away with spoiling your own game, because a lot of the time when you're using it in that circumstance, you're like, I want the player to know mentally that they're about to step into the second arc, the like third, that little decline that happens right before the third arc, where you're like, oh, peak of the second arc, they have to be at their lowest point, and it's about to happen, and it's gonna be with this character, and you're gonna hate it, and you know it's coming. And I think that when you get that right, it's really, really strong. It's kind of a motivating factor to remember that character. I think it's a good thing to go for that if it's earned. And I want to use the flip side of this to talk about a game that I finished very recently called Bayonetta 3.
You finished it? And it's what's the flip side?
Oh yeah. So
oh no.
The reason I mention this is because Platinum, typically masters of music and storytelling in action games. Really good at it. All the Bayonetta games do it great. Metal Gear Rising is probably the most memorable game that I have ever played.
It's the most
I wonder why.
And the thing about Metal Gear Rising that makes it so memorable is that it's a bunch of memes that all in context make perfect sense. Like, if you play through that game, you will get to the part where the crazy senator who talks about football is about to rock your face in, and you feel every emotion because you're like, man, I earned this. I earned my way to Senator Armstrong and the nanomachines. And you know they're coming, but they make perfect sense in context, and you're like, all right, let's go. Bayonetta 3 doesn't do that. Bayonetta 3 has a problem.
No.
It's still a very good game. I think the action is still good. Nowhere near as good as the first two games, or Metal Gear Rising, unfortunately. But the reason I want to throw it in here, I'm going to forget the story of Bayonetta 3, except for the ending, which was really, really dumpster fire, garbage can bad.
Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh my gosh!
Oh no!
So I'm going to set the scene here. If you want to go blind into Bayonetta 3, I'm not going to spoil specific story events, though that is hard to do because it's a multiverse game. So get your mind around multiverse game, meaning, you know, anything that happens can be easily thrown away and completely ignored, which is honestly what I hope they do in the next one, if there's another one.
Okay.
Because Bayonetta 3 is trying to ape a thing that Devil May Cry 5 did really well, which made it very memorable, which is turn Nero, who was introduced as kind of this, not protege, but the up-and-comer of the franchise to make the gameplay different from playing Dante, right? In Devil May Cry 4. People didn't necessarily love him in 4. They liked him, but they didn't love him. 5 turns that around and is like, okay, this character's really good and has earned his spot as like the flagship face of the franchise moving forward.
He's like iconic now.
He's iconic now. His music is great. His gameplay is great. They just fleshed him out to the point where you're like, yeah, I can totally see playing this guy for a full game. And Hideki Kamiya and his infinite wisdom went, man, I really like Devil May Cry 5. Let's try to do that. But in the worst way. When you get, this is the spoilish part. I'm not going to say specific spoilers, but anyone who knows narrative will be able to pick up what happens from this. So tune out for the next minute or two if you don't want to hear it. They decide instead of, hey, we're going to have Dante be really cool at the end and go, instead of like outing him and saying, oh, he's never going to show up again. They're like, okay, he's going to go do some cool stuff on his own. He might show up later, but he's not going to be the main focus of our thing going forward. That's a great way to handle it, because you're like, you leave the door open while also providing a satisfying narrative conclusion.
Yeah.
Bayonetta 3, the part that will live in my mind forever now, because it is so hilariously bad, takes the opposite approach and is like, okay, well, instead of, because there's a new character in Bayonetta 3 called Viola, who they're like, hey, she's going to be a new main character going forward. Except her gameplay isn't very good. It's not particularly fun.
Oh, no.
She can't do the classic Bayonetta dodge, and instead has a parry, which doesn't function half the time because the window for timing it is so tight that you can't do anything.
Oh dear God!
It's very rough. She's not particularly fun to play. She has cool ideas, but she's just not. It doesn't work well. And at the very end, they try to go, hey, she's gonna be one of the main characters in the next game. You should look forward to playing her and not playing Bayonetta. And the way they make you say, oh, you're not going to play Bayonetta, is at the end they have this moment where it's meant to be this heartfelt moment, except what's going on makes no sense because it wasn't set up at all about what's happening. You're like, well, excuse me? And then they're just like, hey, you're not going to play Bayonetta next game. And we're going to stomp on it and be like, not just you're not going to play Bayonetta, you can't play any Bayonetta because all the Bayonettas and all the multiverses are now doing their own thing, and you can't play them. They're off in the Neverland that you will not touch them for at least the next game, I assume.
You know what this kind of feels like?
Bizarre.
This kind of feels like a Master Chief and Spartan Locke situation.
Oh, you know what's even better? So this is I'm about to say an actual spoiler for the ending. It's not a story spoiler, but it is a spoiler. After the end credits of Bayonetta 3, you see your shopkeeper man looks at Viola and goes, "Gotta keep up the family name, Bayonetta." It starts calling her Bayonetta. So what's going on?
Oh my god!
This feels like a Rey Skywalker.
No.
Oh,
you know, I was thinking like yes, but I was also thinking Han Solo.
Yeah, I'm just like
I am the last Bayonetta.
God.
And
he almost
Christ.
Like it might as well be like that's like a film class, game class, just like never do it. Like never start your movie with the alarm clock ringing and the characters is like, oh well, I start my day with it. Never do that. Never like. Can you do that and still have it be good? Yes, but you really have to know what you're doing.
They could have had that be good, but instead, whenever Viola is gonna do a cool thing, the game undercuts it. And it's like, oh no, she trips and falls. Literally. She'll literally.
Are they trying to make her like a lovable klutz in that way, or actually just pathetic?
I don't know. It's so confusing.
I think this game is driving Ryan insane.
They do the same thing with like the male love interest character who's been around since Bayonetta 1 and was very cool in 1 and 2 and like a fun character. This time they just decided to make him like a sad fairy boy. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand the choices that were made here. They're not. They could be sensible if given the care that they needed, but they clearly were not.
Yeah, seriously.
And the way to instantly make people not want to play the new character is by having them scream. The only thing I remember Viola saying for most of the game is "My name is Viola," because she says it like 30 times because no one.
But now her name's Bayonetta.
Oh my god!
Don't get it. All right, see that's how to make me want to forget a game.
Yeah, jeez, that sounds horrible.
Inverse.
You want to know what makes a game, I guess, memorable in the sense that I want to, very, very badly want to forget it, but I can't. Unusable UI.
Oh.
Non-guns 2.
Oh. Yeah,
never forget.
None of us got non-guns.
You know, hieroglyphs, having to decipher the ancient Egyptian language, but in really low pixel density.
And with
It's
to
also
figure out
there's nothing to ground understanding in because you can do
solving because there's no dialogue. You have to solve a point and click puzzle to exit the game that you can only stumble upon.
It's
just
confusing.
Think they had to make Arrival, which is like a 3.5 hour movie about deciphering an alien language, and it takes longer than the runtime of that film.
And there is a game that's really cool called Heaven's Vault. Heaven's Vault is a game about translating a lost language.
Yeah, I've been playing that recently.
Super cool. Works perfectly. No issues. Unlike non.
It's a game about that. Like that's like they probably put like effort into making that fun.
Well, because you can ground your understanding and you are translating a thing. In non-guns, it's just I can't understand what I am seeing on the screen, and there is no context for why I cannot understand this. Yeah. I think another good example of doing it right is Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight gives you enough information to be like, okay, I can recognize that I'm not supposed to know what this is right now, and I'm gonna come back to it and know what it is later. Whereas non-guns is just like I just can't decipher what is happening in front of me at this moment. Yeah, that will live on in infamy in my brain for a long time. I do want to talk about briefly combat systems and what makes a combat system memorable, because one of I think the more memorable games in the Zelda franchise is Breath of the Wild, but I am not going to remember its combat mechanics ever.
Oh, not at all.
Because it's very simple.
If you have weapon durability, I'm instantly going to forget you, unfortunately.
And then I think back to the things that I do remember, and you mentioned them earlier, Alex. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Oh boy, those games had interesting combat that I'm gonna remember forever, even if I didn't necessarily love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think trying new stuff like that makes a good system. Also, just having a system that feels really good, which Breath of the Wild, I think for some people probably hit that. For me, I think it didn't quite get that far, but I know a lot of people did enjoy it because of like the parry timings and whatnot feeling very great when you nail them. Mm-hmm. For me, that's gone to Sekiro now. Sekiro is I will always remember the feeling of hitting that deflect button. Oh, it's so good.
You'll always remember the feeling of missing the parry.
Yep,
that is all I felt.
Just as much. That's where I think Bayonetta comes in again too. You always remember the witch time every time it happens. It's so good, and then you get so pissed off because you can't do it on the other character. You get very angry.
No witch time. How about you go miss a parry?
Well, you have a button that can do the witch time, but when you use your cool ability that your other characters can also use, that's a cool ability where you summon giant monster thing, you then can't block for some reason.
Huh.
So it's like the button you use to do the cool thing, you now can't use while you're doing the other cool thing, but the other character can use it while they're doing the cool thing. So what's the point? It's not good. And then it's compounded by the fact that this is the actual problem with Beta 3's main design, is they did the kaiju design thing, which is very fun and works very well. But the camera, Wyatt. The camera is worse than Ninja Gaiden. Not because it's a bad camera, but because everything is too big. When you're in the normal game, you just can't see what's going on. Legitimately, you cannot tell what is happening because the enemies are too big. So when you're playing the regular game, you have to like watch the corner of the screen to see like the particle V effect of the hammer coming around from one of these big enemies. Otherwise, you just won't know what's happening.
Oh, disgusting.
It's like you're constantly doing Elden Ring by just staying behind a dragon butt the whole game and trying to decipher what it's doing. Just from that one angle. It's impossible. Not easy. Yep. All right, and we got something else they want to bring up.
Yeah. I love when a game breaks its own rules on purpose. And my like go-to example for this, and I'd mentioned this when we had talked about this in our Games Club episode, but Guardians of the Galaxy does this so well. So
On Game Pass, I should play it.
it's so,
you would
oh my
love
god.
it. I think
Like,
you would
very
actually
good.
love it.
no, here's the thing. I've always said this. If It Takes Two hadn't come out in the same year as Guardians of the Galaxy would have been Game of the Year for me. Like,
It's very good.
it's so good.
Is
And
there
the
a
one
way
that's,
you do?
was
Oh,
that,
sorry. Is there a way you can describe how it breaks its rules without it being spoilery if I intend on playing it?
I'm gonna try. I'm
Has
gonna
to do it
try.
anyway. So
Yeah. So there is a section where you're fighting endless waves of enemies, and the only way to stop them from spawning is you have to send Rocket through this little tunnel. And Rocket is claustrophobic to a degree where you order him to do something, which is something that you ask your three other guardians to do throughout the whole game. Is like, hey, do this thing, do that thing. He refuses to do it because it's this tight claustrophobic tunnel. And so you're just sitting there, you're like shooting guys, and your teammates are constantly like dying, so you have to run over and revive them, and it's this like really stressful situation. You're like, Rocket, get in that hole right now. And he's like, no, I can't do it.
yeah.
And so, like, at the same time as Quill is like, Rocket, just get in the tunnel. You're kind of screaming to yourself. You're like, Rocket, get in the tunnel.
Because it's not like they just
everyone.
they don't just like pull it out of their ass for like this one like set piece either. Like they talk about it like many times before, and I think in like a cutscene or something, like Peter tells him to, he's just like, you know, I don't want to do that. You know why? And then like because that's the whole game is discussing not each character's, because some characters get ignored, but most of the characters' trauma in like really like in-depth ways. Like you understand that, like, because that talking about mishandling things, that could totally be seen as something that's like that could be laughed at or that could be really annoying in like a worse game, right?
But it
Where
was
it's just
built
like, okay,
up to properly.
exactly, yeah, which happens a lot with like why won't character do thing when I press button automatically bad? Not in this case, because it was built up very well, and it all of a sudden goes past
It was
game
earned.
and exactly. It dabbles a little bit into that horrifying territory that we call art, that video games don't always get into perfectly, but it got there.
And Alex, if you want a more if you want an example of this that you've probably experienced, actually, is another good example of this was God of War 2018. There's a section where Atreus is being this dumb little shit, and he's like being an obnoxious little kid, and you're like, hey, shoot the arrow, and he's like, no, I don't want to, screw you. And you're like, because the entire game you're like, shoot arrow at thing or shoot arrow at guy, and this one moment where it's very like critical to the story, he's like, no, I don't want to do it, screw you. And you're like, god damn it. Not in like a why isn't the game listening to me way, but why isn't this child listening to me? It's on a level of like the story, how you're supposed to feel, not the game is breaking. You know, it was so well done.
And then he gets full of himself even more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So just little moments like that where the game briefly breaks its own rules especially for the sake of the narrative for me. Oh, I'm gonna love it every time.
That reminds me, there is so in as far as I know, all the Silent Hill games that have a flashlight, you just have a flashlight and you can turn it on, you can turn it off because enemies are attracted to light. You could do that strategically, or you could be a baby like me and leave it on the whole game because you don't want to be in the pitch blackness with whatever those things are. Uh, Never, ever, ever do you have to worry about it running out of battery ever, because that's just not a system that they have to, that they decided that you have to deal with. There's one part in Silent Hill 2, which I consider to be the meanest part of almost any game I've ever played, where you are in a small space full of bugs and your flashlight just runs out of battery and you have to just go through the dark room and scramble for the one-time use battery item. In the whole game, you never have to change the batteries of this stupid thing, but just once to really get under your skin and just make you panic for like a minute and 30 seconds as you're mashing X on the ground to pick up the battery or whatever. It's like, because it's not even a system, because it's not set up to be a system, and in the same way as the Rocket Raccoon and the God of War examples, it's almost like an anti-system where it's just like the game is it's breaking its own rules, but it's almost just like not doing anything. It's just the game is not being a game; it's just
It's
being an ass on purpose.
I can remember the few times that's happened in Uncharted with its the flashlight's out, and then like I think in 3 it was just okay, spiders eat your flesh, but in 4 you could do there was there was a fun bit with using the DualShock controller for one of its more not really adventurous purposes, but like smashing it on your hand like you're trying to
You with a
smash a
flashlight.
yeah, fun stuff with controllers too. That's another thing when they can use controllers inventively.
I mean, Psycho Mantis.
I
That
love
was immediately
Kojima.
what came to
Psycho
mind.
Mantis.
Love Kojima.
Yep.
I mean,
There's a
if
master
I
of that.
can just tree branch off of that immediately, this is one of the weirder aspects of things. But profundity, that is a real word if I'm remembering my English
Yeah,
language
you
correctly.
got it.
In games is like, even if the game is something I don't like, when like something happens that's just like, I want to think about that in the real world. And I'm gonna read the definition of profound because there's more than one. But I wrote it down because this is the one that the YouTube analysis videos use when they're trying to be smart, and so I will too. Profound means having or showing great knowledge or insight, and that's smart person language for just like uh the colonel's face shows up as a skeleton and the player goes, what the hell is going on right now in this video game? When things happen, such as your lifeline, your one singular just emotionless support unit comes up on the screen and tells you to turn the game off in complete 100% seriousness, is just like,
Oh god.
I'm not even afraid. I'm just like, I'm confused. I've been to completely betray
You've
what I
been
just said
bamboozled.
about the English language, profoundified. Um, and this is because I guess I'm like a weeb or something. The examples I could think of were only in Japanese games, and it's pretty much just something that Kojima has gotten just down pat. MGS2 in its entirety, which is the examples I've already said that everybody knows. Like, that is an exercise in, this man literally locked himself in a cabinet for too long of a time and just thought and researched. And this is the fruit of that, because so many weird things come out in the gameplay and story that really don't happen in other forms of art, like a movie or something, because you're interacting with it. And so it's directly just going into your brain, like, how did this person think of this? The entirety of the 100-hour game that is Xenogears, like that feels like a fun religious text, basically, because it's so well informed and so well researched. like it's not all the time that you get games that are like that and are very textbook-esque while still being fun to play. And
I think, Brett, the English and American equivalent of this is CRPGs. Go to like Baldur's Gate, specifically things like Planescape Torment. I think the line here of we're gonna step into the weird, but have it be incredibly profound the whole time. Disco Elysium is the best modern example, I think, of just, hey, we're gonna run with this. And some people aren't going to like it. Some people aren't going to get it. That's totally fine. We're just going to present you with this stuff. We're going to present you with a moment where you have the option to be like talking to a character that is outwardly racist, that has information that you need, and ask you how you're going to handle this situation. Like, what are you doing in this? And provide you with options that are not necessarily good. Which is a fascinating thing. Yeah, because you deal with the consequences of what you do in that game. So it's like you could approach this in a way that is like trying to mimic the person you're talking to. Other people are going to remember that and be like, you spoke like this, and I don't want to talk to you now. And that's a very cool thing for the game to do. And a lot of CRPGs are like that. Mass Effect is another good example of a game that isn't a CRPG doing the same thing. I think there's a lot of moments like that that are really good. And that segues perfectly, Brett, into the thing I wanted to mention next, which was throw a little zaniness in your game. Make it weird. Wackiness. Toss some wacky. It has to be controlled and it has to be earned, I think, is the big thing. You need to earn your wacky.
What are we talking about here? Reality warping? What's going on?
We're just talking. We're talking. You're playing a game that's a serious crime drama. You're having to go through and investigate some murders. You go to a bar with your buddy to talk about the stuff that's happening, and you pick up a microphone, and images of dancing and clapping birds appear on the screen. And it cuts to ice skating rinks as you skate around in a princess costume and sing 24-Hour Cinderella and Yakuza 0. And then it immediately cuts to, this is actually, I mixed up the characters. You don't sing 24-Hour Cinderella with Kiryu, but the point still stands. You do the karaoke thing. And then it cuts to immediately them learning that you might be a murder suspect and possibly be killed by Yakuza very quickly.
Oh so my god!
Deal with the repercussions of that extreme tonal whiplash. And I think that whiplash, if used correctly, is incredibly good, and it creates this really memorable sequence of events. It's why the greatest character introduction that I have ever seen is when Goro Majima is revealed to be a playable character in Yakuza 0.
Oh, yes.
And he's just this, you have a scene of characters in a cabaret club just talking. And they're talking about like some other stuff going on that's relevant to your other character, that you're talking about stuff that might be relevant later. And then they just start talking about like this new guy who's never been here before is getting introduced to the idea of this bar is run by this like mystical man who never hurts a customer but can always resolve fights. And then you cut to you learning how to play the character, and instead of attacking, you are learning how to dodge and aggravate the person who's being a harassing like individual in this bar by offering them towels and then appearing behind them when they go to hit you with a wet towel and be like, hey, you need to calm down a little bit. It's incredible. And there's also an orchestra because, of course, as soon as the man walks out, he snaps his fingers and goes, give me a beat.
Of course.
And it's perfect.
Ryan, please make this the next Game Pass game. If you don't, I will.
Oh, I'm going to make you play Yakuza 0. Absolutely.
I think that was more directed at me than anyone else.
No, I've accepted Wyatt.
What is...
I've accepted that I don't know you will ever finish a Yakuza game. I don't know that you will ever play more than 2 hours of a Yakuza game. Because you kind of have to sit down and play them, or else you're not going to remember details. And I think that's the thing that's going to get you. You're definitely going to get the detail bug of, I don't remember who this character is. And then you're going to be like, well, the story makes no sense, and drop it. That's my prediction.
You just know me so well.
This one is definitely more of a question than an actual suggestion of a theme or mechanic or thing. But so many different aspects go into it, whether it's the overall story quality. Music, for one, is one thing that really helps emotionally charged scenes. What is like something in a video game that you would consider the equivalent to Cowboy Bebop's you're gonna carry that weight with you?
That's a tough one, because I think video games don't tend to like,
because it is harder to
a book like that.
Mm.
That tends to imply finality in like the end of series in a way that like a TV show can be produced with, we know we're gonna have one season. A video game is almost always, unless someone somewhere can convince them like, hey, this is gonna be a one-off, the game has to end, and it will have like a drawn out specific ending. I think maybe Kojima is a decent figure as to why this doesn't necessarily work, is because someone somewhere is going to loop you back into making another Metal Gear game.
We live in a society. Stop making sequels.
That's part of the good thing of something like Final Fantasy or SMT. There's a number next to them, but they're pretty much completely just totally disconnected.
I hard agree with you. I'm like, that's I think where this can come in, is you have the ending of a long RPG that is the end. And in Western games, I think we don't tend to get that because sequel baiting is the big thing to do. It's even in things that are like large scale games like Dragon Age, they tend to not like this idea of, hey, we're going to have this choice that is very final for your character. I think Dragon Age Origins is the exception to this, because we need to be able to bait people into the next game and like draw them in. Which, again, not a huge problem, but it does mean you kind of lock yourself into a certain narrative structure. Whereas with, there's an irony to saying with Final Fantasy games, because most of them do follow the same narrative structure.
Kinda, yeah.
And also, not one of them has been final yet.
They have finality in them. Like, I think that's the strength of... I'm not going to say the thing in case people haven't played Final Fantasy VII, but there's a thing in Final Fantasy VII that everyone knows, and that's a finality. That is done. And then the only reason they're getting away with it now is because they've introduced doubt into this idea the second time around that maybe it won't happen, or maybe it'll be different, maybe it'll be something different. And then now they have the option of, now you get to string people along until it happens again. And it can either happen again or be different.
I think with Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, I think that has definitely the potential to have some carry that weight with you moment.
Yeah, I think it does happen. It's just rare.
There are two games to me that like have a sense of finality to them. One of them is Mass Effect 3, which is like a very controversial game for a lot of people, and I understand that, but like it's definitely a conclusion. And we all know that they continue to make Mass Effect games, but the way that they do it,
to ignore it.
I mean they don't, it's Mass Effect Andromeda isn't like what happens after Mass Effect 3. It's more what's happening alongside Mass Effect 3 in a completely different galaxy. So like it's not really the same thing, but that was like, we've had two games to build up this final fight, and we mean that. We mean final fight. Like emphasize the word final, which is what made that game so much fun for me, because I knew it was like the conclusion. It was like sitting down to watch Endgame, or sitting down to watch like it's like sitting down to watch like a Return of the Jedi for the first time, where it's like I know things technically continued beyond that, but both of those have a sense of finality to them, where it's like everything was building up to this, and that's what Mass Effect 3 was, and that's why I had a lot of fun with it. Was I was like everything was building up to that. The other one for me, and it's a sense of finality in the complete opposite direction, where like Mass Effect 3, you have this big story, you've got this big ending, you've got all this big stuff going on. Returnal's ending is the exact opposite, and I'm not gonna say what it is, but if they ever announce a Returnal sequel, I have
so many questions.
So many questions as to how
what is going on?
How the flying heck that's even going to work.
A lot of doubt.
And I honestly think the way to do it in a video game in a way that still leaves sequels open is have finality in character arcs.
Yeah.
Like treat them like books. where you know the difference between a character is gone for a while and a character is done. Like, this is a final choice. Because I do think there are games that attempt this. One that I haven't played, but I do know has a mechanic rolling around it is Fuga. Melodies of Steel, I want to say is the name, which is by I can't remember the studio, but they're a well-known Japanese studio that mostly does other types of games, and this was like a passion project for a couple of them. And the idea there, you have a giant cannon that can basically destroy any enemy in the game, but to do it, you got to sacrifice one of your party members forever.
Oh.
And launch their soul at them as a bullet, which is metal as hell, super cool, never gonna use it.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody is ever gonna use that gun.
That was like them in the the design, just be like, why not?
I do think, like, you mentioned Mass Effect earlier as the finality thing of like a universe, but I think on a smaller scale, it's stronger in the finality of individual characters. And I'm not going to say names because anyone who's played it will know. But there's multiple characters, and actually a good one is probably Mass Effect 1, which I feel less bad about spoiling a potential outcome to something, is that you can have, or not, Rex, I believe, is one of your party members of Mass Effect 1, and there is a major choice that will happen based on some other choices you've made, where you can either keep him around as a good buddy, or you have to kill him. You have to. He is going to ruin everything. So you have to make the hard choice of like, have I built up a way that I can resolve this situation, or is it done? And the great thing about the game is it will react differently how you do this, and the rest of the games react, which is what made those BioWare games so special. But that sense of finality isn't in the greater narrative, it's for a character. It's for the resolution of a story moment. I think Witcher 3 is another good example of this. The Bloody Baron questline is a reason so many people love that questline. You have Cyberpunk, which I think does manage to do hey, your main character has this ticking clock. You know it's a huge problem. You don't know if there's a resolution. Like, what is the resolution here? It's different depending on the ending you pick. The tone can be drastically different of, hey, we have some hope here, or hey, you are accepting that you're going to die. Like, on the highest of terms, to not spoil anything, but it has that classic Cyberpunk, like, you can choose, hey, I'm gonna go in and I know I'm doomed, or I'm gonna hold out till the very end that there's something that can be done, and that can be a really cool moment of trying to resolve that. It's also why the like passing of the torch as an ideal is such a fun narrative concept of like, hey, we're passing the torch on to the next generation of characters. I think we're hitting that point of like Marvel movies now where they have to pass the torch to the next generation, which is a weird thing to say because I don't think they necessarily handled it well, but
just totally messed it up.
Yeah, we're passing on the torch to such heavy hitters like Ant-Man and She-Hulk. Hooray!
Hey, Ant-Man, you want to twerk together?
But I do think Star Wars has a good example of a different character for it, which is, I wonder if you'll agree with me on this, Wyatt. Ahsoka and Ezra, to different degrees of being like the passing of the torch of certain concepts, not necessarily like narrative arcs or anything, but of being, hey, we're going to continue this story with other characters and see what is done differently. But a lot of that might be that the team and Dave Filoni have some issues with the rest of Star Wars and want to be able to have characters to explore those issues with. But I do think it works in setting up a different dynamic to kind of explore and have a very different feeling on what's going on. It's also a thing Yakuza games do, but I won't mention where or how because.
Also, I know if I was like a main writer for Star Wars, I would want to write characters to get as far away from those prequel assholes, as far away from them as humanly possible.
The great thing about a character like Ahsoka that lets you attach to her is she's adjacent to those characters, so you can contextualize her with those characters in the prequel era, and then she can just go as far away from those as possible.
Yeah.
And now you can do whatever you want. I think that's the benefit there. It's why a lot of franchises will have you'll have a long running guild or something in a fantasy series, and they'll be like, hey, this character's a member of this guild. So you immediately have a concept of like, hey, Assassin's Creed, they're an assassin. You know some starting point here or some relation thing here that you can then follow to the next line of thought and continue through the story.
See, Assassin's Creed is an interesting example because they try and have their cake and eat it too, and that they have this massive storyline.
That's a good way to put
It's
it.
like massive, yeah. They have this massive, like, overarching story going on, but to further the story, they have different characters every like 2 or 3 games, or sometimes every
They
other
also have
game.
this. They have the sequel baiting problem. That's the real issue. Is they have to
Yeah.
constantly bait sequels, which is never in question because you have a
I mean-
perfect way to have sequels infinitely, just with different characters. But instead, they're like, hey, we got to have this one overarching character, so you're gonna follow Desmond or Layla until the end.
Which
They're
are
in the game
always
for like
just
2 hours.
which are always everyone's least favorite character.
Or they're super interesting, and then you're just like, I'm over it. You hit a point where you're just over it because they haven't addressed anything about them ever. Like,
Well, and on paper, having an overarching story that is furthered by different characters and not the same set of characters is inherently a really interesting idea. But I mean, it's Assassin's Creed, so their execution of these ideas have been
so you can tell they're written by different people constantly. And
yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
consistency to what's going on. I think comic books are an example of things that have done this well before, where they'll have like the Court of Owls long running through Batman stuff that has this cool side story or whatnot. Long running B plot jokes and whatnot. So I think there's ways you can do this, but video games are just a hard medium to get it right because you kind of have to know you're going to have a lot of games to stretch the story out of, but you also need to know there will be an end point.
Yeah.
Which
And you
is
also
the thing
can't-
that's hard to come by.
And with something like comic books, you can just focus on the story and the characters, whereas in video
Yeah.
games, you have this whole video game part that you have to
And you know what?
fulfill
We'll
as well.
see, because I think right now the grand experiment of Final Fantasy VII is going on. And we'll
Yeah.
figure out if this works.
That's a good way. That's a good thing to call it. The grand experiment.
But
Final
there is like
Fantasy
other
VII.
types of games that have done this, like the Reapers are maybe an example of like an overarching plot line that takes a while to fully develop. It kind of takes over multiple games, and you hit like the big climax in Mass Effect 3. Another good example is MMOs. Final Fantasy 14 has the arc of the Ascian characters that just resolved within Walker, so you've got this whole arc of like, you have the plot of every expansion, which is its own thing, and then you have this overarching plot of this ancient civilization group of people doing their own evilly, Knievelly things in the background.
Riding on dirt bikes.
Yeah, riding on dirt bikes in the background and like high-fiving in the distance as you play the game.
And I don't know if it's done this way anymore because I haven't played this game in some time, but that's kind of what Destiny was doing, like Destiny 2 was doing, is every time they came out with an expansion, it was like mostly a self-contained story, but it also played some vague part in some larger vague story that's going on. I don't know if that's changed at all since they've switched to
Not
their
really.
seasonal model, because I haven't really played a
It's
lot
more just
recently,
confusing
but-
because they kind of build upon the idea that you know what's already going on.
That you know what's going on and that you are inevitably going to buy the seasons that are coming after it. Like Witch Queen has a good story in it, and it has a short subplot that leads really nicely into Season of the Chosen, which is good. If you have the Season of the Chosen content,
until
that
Season
you
of the
love.
Chosen doesn't exist anymore, or hopefully
Yeah.
they figure out some way to have these bits of content, at least the story parts, in the game somewhere. But
And Season of the Chosen is, by that extent, a really good, both like alongside and like directly after story bit for Witch Queen. And then it sort of, peters out with looser and looser connections, but the stories are still connected.
it kind of
in the
varies. 'Cause,
overall.
like the current seasonal thing, which is the pirate theme season, is really just, hey, go have fun doing pirate things for a little while until it loops back and connects a little bit. But
Yeah.
that's okay in seasonal content because I think it's a benefit to not have it be too important, but still have a way to like showcase characters that you may not normally see. I think Lightfall is going to be the real test for that. Of, are they going to go for self-contained, or are we going super hard on this witness thing is going to be the big plot line, and we're not going to actually have like an ending of the individual expansions. We're just going to lead into the next thing. So I think that's gonna be the
I
tester.
hope it's going to be an end because they've been teasing. The end to the Light and Darkness saga.
Yeah.
So. Fingers
My thing
crossed
is like
they are
Witch
going to wrap
Queen,
things up.
really good campaign, wraps up, and then it just ends kind of in a hey, see you next time.
Yeah.
moment.
It's sequel baits, but then the sequel to it, which are the seasons in between, just kind of ignored that. Well, Haunted has things like, okay, this is the witness, gathering more forces. You remember that guy that you were palling around with in Season of Opulence? He's much more evil now, and he's gone.
It's very hard to follow.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, I guess that's what we're doing. But hey, we've done it. We've looped our time slot for tonight. We've gotten all the way around. We talked a lot about a lot of good things, I think. And I'm sure we'll have to do an inverse of this episode at some point.
Probably, yeah.
we gotta have
problem
some
is
deals.
of the least memorable thing. So we just
no.
talk
I think we
about,
need to do
So
most
we just talk about-
memorable, like
So
moments
we
that
did-
have ruined games.
I was gonna say
Least-
least memorable. That's gonna be really hard to remember, though.
Exactly.
Least memorable moments. We just talk about Ubisoft for like 3 hours.
We're talking about all the Dynasty Warriors games individually.
World
we talk about
design.
Ryan and I talk about Fallout 76 for like a solid 15 minutes.
It's gonna be the least remembered episode from the people that watch us.
What's going on?
Do we want
Alright.
to? Do we want to make an episode with
It'll
purposefully
be
bad
like
ratings?
It'll be like episode 135, and then next week will also be episode 135 because we forgot that we filmed 135.
We should actually follow through on that joke.
Oh
Be fun.
yeah. Well, now we're gonna have to.
Oh, boy.
That means it's time for shoutouts. It's time for the end of the show, which means shoutout time. As Wyatt slowly gurgles his mason jar water.
Wow. All right. You know what? Then I'm gonna go first.
Wow, called
My
out.
shout out is for the movie The Nice Guys. If no one has ever seen the movie The Nice Guys,
Oh, it's
It
so
is-
funny.
Fun.
It's so
such
good.
a good movie. It's a 1970s like detective story co-starring Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe, directed by Shane Black, for anyone who knows who Shane Black is. And it's about these two schlubby wannabe detectives looking into the death of an adult film star in 70s LA. And it is a fantastic like just mystery comedy, and it is fan freaking tastic, and you should definitely go watch it because it's on Netflix, so you don't have an excuse. Go.
Because
Yeah. It's also nice and self-contained.
Yep.
That's,
And it doesn't get too stupid. Like, it doesn't get too stupid. It
gets a little
reins
stupid
itself
in a
in.
good way.
Well, in a good way, but it
The
doesn't get
car
like
scene.
it doesn't like get Marvel movie big and
Yeah.
stupid.
No.
It keeps itself restrained in its
character focused.
stupidness. Yeah, it's great.
I'm gonna stare you two down. So someone.
I'm trying to juggle between like the 6 different options I have in my head, so I'll just go with one at random, even
Slot
if it's not the best.
machine.
Yep.
Exactly, yeah. Shout out to a show that I've been told to watch for a very long time now called Mushishi.
Ooh.
It's one of those gosh dang cartoons where nothing happens, and after watching 2 or 3 episodes, I just kind of want to fall asleep, and that's probably part of the point. Because the soundtrack usually consists of the sound of the ocean waves and maybe a wind chime, and it totally
Wow.
fits, and it
It's a
totally
s-
works.
It's a
It's
sleep
very
aid
relaxing.
anime.
It's exactly. It basically it kind of follows like a kind of like detective formula where like problem happens to characters. Very very relaxed man with white hair comes to help them, and they just it does the thing that I usually don't like, where it's like we're just gonna throw some technobabble equivalents at you and be like, well, the squibbly dangle is doing the dobbly do to your jigglywoff, and that's why that's not working so well. But instead of it just
Jigglywoff?
being like, I don't get it, this is bad, I'm like, I don't get it at all, but this is good. And it's so relaxing that it gets away with it.
That's
So
a good
very,
spot to
very
be
good
in.
so far.
That's great.
All right, Alex, you want to take it or you want me?
I'll do it because mine's anticlimactic. I made some really good polenta, honey, and rosemary scones the other day.
Oh, yeah. That wasn't underwhelming. That sounds delicious.
It's a good food, you know? We should have good food sometimes. Speaking of good food, a game called Against the Storm. By the loosest of connections, it has
food for the soul?
You need to manage the food of your population so they don't starve and die. Is a city builder, and occasionally I talk about city builders on the show, but this one's really good because it's a roguelike. It's a roguelike city builder where you build small cities, and then you might die while you're building them, but hey, it doesn't matter because you can just go build another one, and then you please the queen, and the queen who lives in a volcano gives you stuff to build, and you can build better cities and keep doing it. And this game has been in early access for a long time because it released on the Epic Store like either 6 months or a year ago. Nobody knew about it because there was no marketing for the Epic Store. It just now came out on Steam, exploded because it looks very good and very cool. And it's been very fun. This kind of absorbed the small amount of free time I had this week, and it was very, very good. It's a nice, relaxing city builder about beavers, humans, and harpies getting along and having a nice settlement. Oh, and the lizards. Can't forget the lizard people.
Of course not.
Well, yeah, because if you please the humans too much, the lizards will get mad that the humans are too happy. That's actually not how it works, but if you build the things that makes the humans happy, you probably can't build the things that make the lizards happy, so the lizards get mad, and then they die when the storm happens, because it's constantly raining, because the world is being apocalyptically flooded by a rainstorm all the time. So you kind of got to deal with that in whatever way you're going to do it. So you're building a city
that can float, right? Or a little town that can float, right?
No, you're building it. There's a thing I haven't gotten to yet where I've built three or four cities, and there's a little thing to build one more before a thing called the Blight Storm happens. I don't know what that means, but there's a big angry mark on my turn marker for it when it does. So
probably very friendly.
I
think that's where the roguelike
maybe that wipes out all the cities. Maybe that wipes out the stuff, and then I gotta do it again, which is the loop. And hey, I'm okay with it because it's a really good city builder. And you have this cool mechanic where you cut into glades, and then you have space in the glades to build things. Or there might be an evil thing that will kill all of your villagers if you don't deal with it right now, which is very fun. It's a way to do boss fights in a game that doesn't have combat. So,
neat.
It's kind of neat. It's a cool game that I hope goes very far, and it's already very good, despite being in early access. This is one of those games that just kind of feels done already, but they're just going to add more to it, and I'm like, all right, I'll play this. That's the show. That's the 001 radio for this week. We'll be back next week. That's it. That's what we'll do. We'll be back next week, Tuesday, 7 a.m. Eastern on the podcast platform of your choice. December might get weird. Buckle up.
We'll deal with it. It's okay.
Oh god, I forgot to plug in my computer.
If there aren't episodes on Anchor, they will be on YouTube. So
yes.
He didn't plug in his